Welcome to my channel. Today we will meet one of the deadliest villains in world history. A villain so evil that he profited off the pain of others, all while betraying his own kind. And then at the end, I'll show you how his crimes became the worst maritime disaster in US history. But first, let me set the scene. April 27, 1865, the American Civil War had just ended. Hundreds of soldiers were finally going home, celebrating freedom and life. But as the steamboat Sultana sailed up the Mississippi River, joy turned into horror in the deadliest maritime disaster in U.S. history. On a moonless night in April, a paddle steamer named the Sultana was sailing north on the Mississippi River towards St. Louis. On board were 2,100 Union soldiers, many of them returning home after enduring years of captivity in Confederate prison camps. They'd witnessed unimaginable horrors, and now they were finally free. So naturally, the mood on the ship was cheerful. Soldiers sang, laughed, and dreamed of reuniting with their families. In reality, though, this steamboat was a floating time bomb. You see, the Sultana was designed to carry 376 people. But on this night, it was packed with more than 5 times that amount. To make matters worse, the ship's boilers were weak and in desperate need of repair. But instead of getting fixed, they were patched together with poor materials and sent back out to sea. What happens next is straight out of a nightmare. At 2 a.m., while the ship was sailing near Memphis, Tennessee, the boilers exploded. Fire engulfed the 3 wooden decks instantly. Hundreds of soldiers were thrown into the dark, freezing river. Screams echoed through the night as passengers desperately reached for life rafts. But there were none. All around them, the water churned with hundreds of hands, faces, eyes staring blankly ahead. The explosion had ripped the roof off of the ship, leaving it in 2 pieces, a burning inferno that drifted with the current. Some burned alive, others jumped into the icy water and struggled against the current. Many drowned before reaching the shore. As the sun rose, it revealed a horrific sight. The river was covered with boaties floating for miles downstream. Only a few life rafts were available, and even those filled with passengers who could not swim were abandoned. After the ship sank, only 345 survivors made it to shore. Of the 2,100 people on board, 1,800 died. This disaster killed more people than the sinking of the Titanic. Yet most Americans have never heard of it. So why do you think that is? Well, because this disaster happened just after Abraham Lincoln's assassination. It got swept under the rug. It was literally forgotten in the headlines. This is the sad truth behind the Sultana Explosion. And now it's time for us to meet the villain responsible. His name was Lieutenant Colonel George W. McLean, and if I had to describe him in one word, it would be greedy. He was so obsessed with making money that he put countless lives at risk, and he did it knowing full well that what he was doing was illegal. You see, when the Civil War began, McLean was placed in charge of transporting troops for the Union Army. He started off with the best of intentions, but as time went on, he grew tired of the low wages and lack of recognition, so he hatched a plan to make some extra cash. You see, McLean was supposed to transport 300 soldiers per trip, but instead, he crammed 900 men onto each boat. He pocketed the difference, all while breaking the law. If that wasn't bad enough, McLean also hired a captain named James B. Parker, who was known for ignoring safety regulations. Parker had a poor record and had previously been fined for overloading his ship. But McLean didn't care. He needed someone who would look the other way. So he paid Parker a bonus for every soldier he smuggled aboard. After the explosion, it was clear that this was no accident. McLean and Parker had cut corners and put greed above human lives. But despite the overwhelming evidence, neither man faced justice. Why is that? Well, after the Civil War ended, everyone was eager to move on. Officials knew that prosecuting these men would bring up painful memories and cause unrest. They hoped that with time, the wounds would heal and the tragedy would fade into the past. Yet, despite the cover-up, the truth eventually came out. An investigation revealed that the ship's boilers had been severely damaged and were not seaworthy. In fact, the captain had even written a report detailing the ship's poor condition. But McLean ignored it. He was more concerned about profits than passenger safety. Still, nobody was punished. In the end, the only people who suffered were the passengers. Most of them were young men who had just endured for years of war. They'd seen unspeakable things, and now many of them would never make it home. Even though the disaster happened 150 years ago, it's still one of the worst maritime disasters in U.S. history. In fact, it claimed more lives than the sinking of the Titanic, yet few people know about it. Why is that? Well, because it was forgotten in the headlines. In 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and the nation was thrown into chaos. Suddenly, everyone forgot about the Sultana explosion. Even those who survived never forgot the trauma of that night. Imagine it. You survive the explosion and jump into the water. You struggle to stay afloat as the river rushes by. When you finally reach shore, you feel like you've been reborn. But deep down, a part of you is still on that burning ship. You can hear the screams and smell the smoke. Then the guilt sets in. You wonder why you survived when others didn't. And then the nightmares begin. Every night, you relive the horror of that night until eventually you can't take it anymore. So you try to escape your memories by moving to a new city, changing your name and starting over. But no matter where you go, a part of you will always be on that burning ship. That's the legacy of the Sultana explosion. For the survivors, life went on. They married, had children, and started families. But the trauma of that night never faded. It stayed with them until they died. Today, only a few memorials along the Mississippi remind us of those 1,800 lives lost in silence. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of their screams. I know this is a sad topic, but sometimes it's important that we remember these tragedies so that they never repeat themselves. It's also important that we learn about the heroes who risked their lives to save others. Take, for example, the captain of the nearby steamboat. He could have easily ignored the disaster, but instead he put his own ship at risk and saved many lives. Or the group of African Americans who rode around the clock until they couldn't take it anymore. Their bravery saved dozens of lives and should never be forgotten. These are the real heroes of the Sultana explosion, the people who risked everything to save others. They deserve our respect and admiration. Now, if you want to learn more about this tragedy, I've included several resources in the description below. There's also a book called The Sultana by Hampton Sides, which details the events leading up to the explosion and its aftermath. This is a story that needs to be told, a story of greed, negligence, and heroism. It's a story that reminds us of the importance of safety regulations and the need for accountability. It's also a story that celebrates the courage of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. So let's make sure that we never forget the Sultana explosion. Let's honor the memory of those who died by working to prevent such tragedies from happening again. And let's celebrate the heroism of those who risked their lives to save others. They may be gone, but they will never be forgotten. Thank you for listening.